Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of Advanced Bass Fishing, and much appreciated you guys checking today's video out and spending some time with me because, guys, I really like doing these advanced bass fishing videos, just sitting back and talking fishing with you guys. I'm out here in my tackle room, just sitting down, having a conversation like you and I would just be, talking to each other if we were out fishing or something. And one of the things that I like to do in these advanced bass fishing videos is I like to share my experiences I've had over the years, what works for me. Now, what I am talking about may not work for everybody, but it's success I've had on particular techniques that I'm passing along with you guys. And I really enjoy just sharing all that information in a casual setting like this. So today, guys, what I want to talk about is I want to relay a story that it was probably the most educational day I've ever fished in my entire life. The day I learned how to flip a jig into willow trees. This particular day, I'm gonna go over it, and I'm gonna tell you how we did it, and what I learned about it, and what you will learn at the end of this video as far as what I learned that particular day is going to help you out tremendously anytime you're pitching and flipping around shallow cover. So we'll get into that in today's video. Also, guys, before we get started, I just wanted to extend a big thank you out there. You guys hear me talking about it. Thank you very much for everybody that's been using and bookmarking my Tackle Warehouse link that I put in every video description. If you guys want to help advanced bass fishing out here, the best thing you can do is just that link, the Tackle Warehouse link that I put in the description. If you guys would just use it and bookmark it for your tackle purchases, the channel gets a little bit of commission on anything you buy. That's a really good way to help out. So thank you very much for everybody that's been doing that. Okay, guys, story time with this, and I'm gonna tell you the story that I'm gonna let you know, or you'll see, for example, what I'm talking about, what you can learn from it. This is the day that I learned what flipping was and how to flip and the effectiveness of flipping. I was down at, when I think I was probably, I don't know, probably 20, 21 years old when this happened. And you got to realize back then, this was the early 80s, not many people knew how to flip. Flipping and pitching was not like a deal. People just didn't, there was a few people that were doing it and having some success, but overall, most anglers didn't do it. They didn't know, and I didn't do it. I'd heard what it was, but I didn't understand what it was or how to do it. So there was a tournament down at Grand Lake. And I was down there just fishing for fun out of my little junky 16-foot flat bottom, and I went up to watch this weigh-in. And the guy that won the tournament was a guy named Terry Thomas, and he won the tournament with 27 pounds. And I'd been fishing that day, and I caught 1 2-pound fish. And I just went up to him. I didn't know him from anybody. And I said, I just would like to know. I said, you don't have to tell me, but how in the world did you catch 27 pounds of fish? I caught 1 fish today, and I just don't, I can't even imagine catching 27 pounds. I said, is that anything you'd like to share with me? And he goes, well, sure, man. He goes, I'll tell you what. He goes, there's another tournament tomorrow. He said, why don't you come and fish it with me? It's a buddy tournament, and I'll show you how I caught him. And I didn't know this guy from anybody. And I said, well, sure, I'd love to, So anyway, we went out there that next day. The water was high. It was Grand Lake in Oklahoma. The water was high and flooded into the willow trees. And back then in the early 80s, there was a ton of willow trees in Grand Lake before all the developers ripped them out. It's not hardly a handful anymore in the lake, but back then there was a ton of willow trees. And we got out there was probably 3 or 4 foot of water in the willow trees. It was a stormy day, I remember. It was overcast and thunderstorms were rolling around. And Terry pulls out a flipping stick, and he had 30-pound test, high visibility blue monofilament line, a 1/2-ounce black jig with a black pork frog on it. And all I had was a 7-foot rod with 15-pound test green Maxima on it. And the only jigs I had were like little 1/4 ounce and little 3/8 ounce jigs. So I didn't even really know how to pitch and flip. And I got out there and I started watching Terry, and Terry was just methodically and like very artistically flipping this jig with this heavy, super bright, heavy line into these flooded willow trees. And I remember saying, it's like, he's not going to catch a bass. He said, that line is like, it looks like a rope going into the water. After about an hour and a half of watching him do that and watching him jack 4-pounders right and left in the boat, I became a believer. And I just sat back and watched him and absorbed everything that I could. We wound up winning the tournament that day with 28 pounds. Terry caught every one of them. I think I caught one 2-pounder that we didn't even weigh in. But that particular day, guys, I learned that was the most valuable day I've ever spent on the water, because I saw exactly what it took to catch big fish flipping out of shallow cover. Now, here's what I learned from that. Number one, it's all about breaking down cover when you're pitching and flipping and getting that bait to where those bigger fish at. Now, one of the things that I noticed about Terry when he was pitching and flipping, and the things that I've noticed about my own pitching and flipping, is when you're flipping and pitching into shallow cover, it doesn't matter if it's a lily pad field or a flooded bush or a flooded willow tree or a lay down tree or a boat dock or whatever, there are key places within that particular piece of structure where the big fish are going to be. And what those areas are, as far as where these big fish go, it depends on how the cover is positioned on the bank that you're fishing. Now, say for example, if you're fishing a lay down tree that's on a bank, and that bank is on like a 45-degree angle bank, and let's say for example, where that tree, say the end of the tree is in like say 10 foot of water, and midway down the tree when it's on the bank is in 4 or 5 foot of water. Now, depending upon your water clarity, the fish are going to be in different depths on that piece of cover. Obviously, the cleaner the water, a lot of times the deeper they're going to be, the dirtier the water, the shallower they're going to be. But on top of that, you have to look at the piece of cover on how the structure is broke down and find the sweet spot within that piece of cover. And that's what I learned from Terry, is where to put that jig into the sweet spot on that flooded willow tree or the lay down or whatever you're fishing. Now, when you look at a piece of cover, I don't care, again, if it's a boat dock or it's a patch of lily pads or it's a patch of cattails or it's a lay down tree or whatever, there is going to be one part of that particular shallow cover that is a little bit more complex than others. In other words, if you look at a lay down tree and you've got limbs coming off of it, you can, after practice, you can look at that particular lay down tree and you can notice there's one area within that tree that is a little bit more complex as far as more cover or the angle that the limbs are coming in the water, but it stands out as a little bit more complex than the rest of the tree. If you look at a flooded willow tree or a flooded bush in the water, the same way. There's going to be one part of that flooded willow tree that's a little bit more complex. Same with the boat dock. You look back in the boat dock and there's going to be one part of that boat dock that's maybe a little bit harder to get into, and maybe there's crossbars, or the dock, the way it's constructed, it's a little bit more complex. That is where the big fish are going to be, is in that sweet spot of the complex area. And like I said, every single piece of cover is different, so you sort of have to figure that out at times. Now, I'm not saying that that's where all the big ones are, but that's where a high percentage area of those big ones are. Another thing about it that I figured out, and from watching Terry, is when you're pitching and flipping, you have got to be able to put that bait where you want that bait to be. Because pitching and flipping is all about stealth and accuracy. That's the key on catching fish with it, because if you can't put that jig where you want to put that jig in that piece of cover, if you miss that target that you're going to by 4 or 6 inches, you may not never get a bite. You've got to be able to put that jig right where you want to put it. So, guys, I know it sounds boring and it sounds like first grade type stuff, but you have got to practice your pitching and flipping skills to be able to put that bait where you're wanting it. I have had so many people that I've taken out on the water lessons where we're fishing like flooded bushes or something with a jig, and I'm just whacking them right and left, and they simply cannot get a bite because they can't put that jig where they need to put it. It's not hard to catch them once you put it there, but it's like they simply can't do it. They can't pitch that jig 20 or 30 foot away in an area this big around to get into that sweet spot. So if you want to be a good pitcher and flipper, the thing that you got to learn above anything else is practice your skills to put that bait where you want. And I know that's a lot of people, they don't want to assign that the level of importance that it deserves simply because it's too obvious. And people say, well, God, there's got to be more to it than just putting it exactly where you want it. No, it's not. You got to be able to put it exactly where you want it. The next thing with that is really important in pitching and flipping is you need to let your bait fall on a slack line as vertical as you can. So in other words, one of the things I learned from Terry flipping and pitching that day is when you pitch that jig into a piece of cover, I don't care if it's on a whatever piece of cover it is, the way that I like to do it and the way he showed me is when you pitch it out there, keep your rod tip high in the water and drop that rod tip as that jig is falling, and make sure your rod tip falls ahead of your line so your line is falling on a slack line. Now, when your line falls on a slack line, it gives it a different look, it gives it a different glide in the water, and there's something about it that triggers the fish. Also with it is once that jig finally hits the bottom, you need to hop it pretty high off the bottom. Don't just sit there and like drag it or shake it. You need to snap it off the bottom where it comes up like a foot off of the bottom or so. That's gonna really, really trigger those bigger fish to hit with it. And finally, guys, you have to be stealthy. It's like with your boat. When you're pitching and flipping shallow targets, in addition to being able to having to be an accurate caster, you have to put your boat in the correct position in order to catch those fish. So what the correct position is keeping your boat not too close and not too far away, but you have to figure out the exact right distance to keep your boat away from the cover to where you can stay far enough away from the fish and still make an accurate presentation. And that's the key. You want to remember, you always want to try to keep your boat as far away from your cover as you can, yet you have to be able to make that accurate presentation. So you have, there's a little, give and take there as far as that distance that you have to figure out. And also, guys, you're going to have to calculate in like the wind speed and if there's any current in the water, about how that's drifting your boat into cover. Try to stay off of your trolling motor as much as possible. Turn your electronics off. And just being quiet and stealthy is going to go a long way to catching those fish flipping and pitching. So it's an art form, guys. I'm telling you right now that as far as the difficult techniques in bass fishing, I put jerkbait fishing as the #1 most difficult technique, followed by pitching and flipping. Now, pitching and flipping may seem simple to a lot of people, but there's so many different variables that actually determine if you're going to generate a strike or not. It's not just putting the bait where you want it, which is an important part of it. You've got to put it where you want it, and then you've got to have everything else in line. You got to have the right lure color, the right lure weight, everything. The color in relationship to the water, clarity and the sunlight condition, a lot of different variables out there. But anyway, if I can give you one thing that I learned from that day with Terry that changed my entire fishing life, practice your pitching and flipping skills to where you can put that bait where you want it. And if you can do that, your odds and your success and your consistency catching bass, flipping and pitching are going to go through the roof with that. So anyway, hope it helps you guys out. We'll talk later.